As I got closer, I can now see that this guy is eating the deer. Long-haul truckers, what's the creepiest and most paranormal thing you've seen on the road at night? I'm a truck driver in the UK. Was driving through rural Scotland one night going down a country lane. All of a sudden I start to see flashing lights come through the trees. Lights of all colors flashing through the trees and causing some really freaky looking shadows on the road. I'm not a believer of aliens or anything, but my first thought was UFOs. Safe to say I put my foot down and got out of there. Found out the next day it was rave, happening in a field. But at the time it didn't half scare me. My father was an 18-year-old gas station attendant in the late 70s, and without a certain long-haul trucker I probably wouldn't be here. The gas station was open 24/7 and my dad was the only one working the night shift, 11 to 7 I think. A guy comes in and just gives him the creeps. Seems sketchy. He was wearing tight jacket and pants and you could tell he had something in his pants under the jacket. It was during the summer and it was warm, so why is he wearing a jacket to begin with? It was later confirmed he was on drugs. A lot of truck drivers used this station as it was the only one open 24 hours for a long stretch of the highway. They also had a big lot where they let truckers park and sleep or take a break. On this night at this time it was just my dad, sketchy dude, and one trucker in there he kinda knew, as in, came in frequent enough to be conversational, and asked if he'd stay in the station and hang out until sketchy dude left. Well, after looking at the stocked shelves for several minutes while sneaking peeks at my dad behind the counter, the sketchy guy eventually looked fed up and got into his blue car and sped off. Cool trucker guy hung out with my dad a little longer until another couple of guys came in to use the booths they had to eat a sandwich. I should also point out this was pretty middle of nowhere rural southeast United States in the 70s. CB and landline was it. My dad only had a landline in the store. Dad did not have any protection or weapon of any kind. So the hours pass and my dad had shaken off the paranoia when all of a sudden this truck driver guy in a car comes hauling into the lot, jumps out, and sprints into the store hollering he needs a phone. He didn't have a Citizens Band radio nor did he see a phone at the other station. He also wasn't familiar with the area and my dad's station was the first place he found. Calls 911 to report that he had walked in on a gas station 40 miles back, next closest station, to find the attendant shot and dead. No one else around. And the only other piece of information is that a blue car was speeding out of the lot when the trucker pulled in. Apparently they eventually apprehend the guy in the blue car. My dad confirms it was sketchy dude from earlier in the night, and they charge him with murder and armed robbery. The long-haul trucker who waited around with my dad that night, thanks and hope you're keeping it real. Also worth adding that apparently sketchy guy in blue car was already a bad apple who was either being looked for or on probation or something. He was in the system. When I went to local driving, my route ran near an air reserve base in Indiana, so you'd see planes and helicopters pretty often. One night, about 2 a.m., I was headed to pick up another load when I saw a bright green light in the corner of my windshield. It was too low to be an aircraft. LT moved pretty slowly, then darted and I lost sight of it behind some trees I drove by. Typical I saw UFO stuff, but I still think it was just a helicopter or a jet that I saw at the prefect angle that turned after a takeoff. The jet pilots have broken the sound barrier over town a couple times in the past, sonic boom, so a jet flying abnormally isn't necessarily out of the realm of possibility. Driving south on I-75 in the winter in Ohio, I witnessed a compact car like a Cobalt or similar get on the on-ramp to merge into I-75 north and lost control. It went sideways, fell at least 6 feet off the ramp and onto the shoulder of the interstate landing on all four wheels, spun 360 degrees, and then proceeded to merge into traffic like it was nothing. Blew my mind. The CB radio was going nuts for about 5 minutes. Holy hell, who else just saw that? Etc. Myself and 2 friends had to drive from Laredo, Texas to Baton Rouge, Louisiana one night in my Ford van. It was about Zam. There is a particularly long and dark section of the highway just outside Laredo. No buildings, towns or lights for about 50 miles. I was in the right lane coming up on a truck and pulled out into the left passing lane. As I was slowly overtaking this long truck, my peripheral vision caught a sudden movement of this big truck towards the right shoulder. I saw the truck was swerving to avoid hitting a person dressed in all white face, whose arms were folded across the chest and eyes were closed as they walked across the highway. I swerved to the left and barely missed this ghostly-looking person with my passenger mirror. Can still remember seeing that the eyes were closed. That's how close we came to hitting this person. I was 23, my newly married husband and I decided driving team would be a fun adventure after college, rather than jumping into the 9 to 5. I was down in Arizona, on a long stretch of nothing about 4 a.m., when a guy pulled up next to me waving his CB. I never left mine on. Listening to those guys BS was irritating. I turned on my CB and he told me I had a blown tire. I thanked him, figuring I would stop at the next truck stop. He kept harassing me to pull over and check my tire for a good 40 miles. I finally got to a next town and pilot truck stop, got out and checked my truck. No blown tires anywhere. No clue what that guy would have done to me, but so glad I trusted my gut and didn't stop. My stepdad is a truck driver and I asked him this question and he gave me 3 answers. In Winston-Salem, NC, a guy was masturbating while driving by his truck, and my stepdad threw his water bottle at him. Another time he said he was up near Oregon and he was the only one on the freeway at the time, since it was around 2 a.m. and something large and pale swooped down a few yards in front of his truck and swooped back up into the tree line. While driving at 7 a.m. a tire rolled ahead of him and went across the median, nearly hitting another car. I saw a clown staggering down an alley in the city, back facing us, while we were coming to a stoplight at like Lamb. Looked like he was still blowing balloons. Not seeing his face made it more ominous. I'm not sure if it's either really creepy or sad. Maybe he was on his way to abduct children, or maybe he was blind drunk after a long day. My dad has several stories from hauling logs in Idaho and driving trucks through Utah and Nevada. My favorite is from actually just in his pickup going through Utah. He said there was a light keeping pace with him out in the desert on a moonless night. It kept pace for a minute before it disappeared and his truck turned off. He stopped and turned it on and pulled off at the next diner. The folks in the diner called it a common occurrence. The creepiest is when he was hauling logs in Idaho and was coming down from near Coeur d'Alene area during a snowy winter night. He was putting on chains before heading down steep grade and said all of the hair stood up on his body. It felt like there was something watching him. Halfway down the switchbacks he saw a large figure standing on a 20-foot tall embankment. As he got closer it jumped down and the shoulders were as tall as the cab. In a single bound it leapt down and then leapt over to the other side of the embankment. At the time he thought it was a Sasquatch, now he says it was probably a demon trying to make him crash. He didn't stop to remove the chains until he was well away from the mountain. I am a log truck driver in the Pacific Northwest. We go up into the woods on logging roads and haul logs back from the loggers to sawmills. We start work very early in the morning, 2 to 5 a.m., so it's nighttime obviously. One of my coworkers pulled away from the job and started down the logging road. After a couple miles, after the load had settled a bit, he decided to pull over and throw his remaining wrappers around the load. As he is tying his load down, he looked back and saw a mountain lion watching him from 10 feet off of the end of his trailer. He slowly backed up to his driver door and got in. By the time he looked in his mirror the lion had disappeared. Not paranormal, but it's surely creepy. We see lions and bears fairly often out there, but to be that close and out of the truck. We face different obstacles up in the woods than highway drivers. My friend, his wife, and several neighbors last year saw a large car drive to the river at the end of their street in Indianapolis and dump a girl's body. All in broad daylight at like 2 p.m. Of course the car sped away. My friend and another neighbor run up to the side of the river, and it's definitely a girl's or woman's body. Said he wanted to throw up, and did later on. This girl had obviously been murdered. They got the license plate, but do not know if the people were ever caught. My dad has told me this story a couple times and each time it always kind of weirds me out. He is not a trucker, but when he was in the military one night him and a buddy went out to get food. About halfway into their drive down a dark road my dad and his buddy noticed a woman in a red dress with black hair walking. My dad and his buddy found it odd because it didn't seem safe and it wasn't that warm. My dad said deep down he knew stopping was a bad idea and so they drove by a little more slowly to get a glimpse to see if she needed help. As they drove by my dad and his friend both swear she has no face. Instead there was just a black hole as if she had been in a wreck and her face was taken off. It freaked them both out so badly my dad floored it, and when they stopped to eat both of them, they agreed they saw the same thing. Come to find out a woman had been killed earlier that year in an accident. They were talking about it when a stranger told them the sightings of the woman were actually common. I am not one to believe in the paranormal, but the story is still kind of weird. Okay, so here is a spook for you. and to this day I still have no idea. So I was in the Virginia-Maryland area, and had a lot of work-related sites ranging from downtown Baltimore to Virginia Beach and all around. Friday wrapped up, and I hit the road to some social arrangements I had made for the weekend. Spent the weekend with friends out in various parts of Virginia, got dragged off to other places even further out, the usual weekend fun times. It's late Sunday night when I have to leave, or I'm not going to be able to get home in time to start my, thankfully late afternoon, Monday. I'm fully rested, I didn't do any drinking, I'm not into drugs. On the highway at about 3 a.m., in the middle of nowhere between Roanoke and DC, absolutely nobody around. I'm cruising along in the left lane simply because nobody else is around. No headlights for the past hour, no tail lights either. No road lamps either. It's dark, it's mildly damp, it's foggy. I have the music up, I'm feeling good, all is fine. And then I just happen to look to the left and there is a dog barking at me. A German Shepherd, in a car passenger seat, somewhat blue glow from the instruments inside the car, and it's got its face to its window and it's barking its head off at me. I get a good hard look at it, too, because at first my brain is not registering the cop car, dummy. I'm doing 90 plus in a 75, I promptly have the oh moment when the dog, the instruments, the white Crown Vic light bar all click in my brain after a second hard look. I put my foot on the brakes and start slowing down hard but safe, to pull over. I even put my blinker on to start shifting lanes over to the right to pull over because, wait. There is no shoulder on the left side of this road. I look back to my left, where there is still no shoulder room for another car, and it's just gone. No trace. I slammed my brakes and stopped in the middle of the highway, flipped on all my light bars and even looked around with my handheld spot. There was nothing. No tail lights, no headlights, no engine sounds, nothing. There are no other tire marks in the damp but mine, and I can see for a nice long distance both ways, too. Nothing. My vehicle had great visibility, and a lot of extra lighting, off-road SUV with the trimmings. There is no possible way somebody pulled a sneaky, let alone drove that fast on wet sloped grass and rocks on my left side. So, yep, there you have it. Ghost cop and his dog didn't like me speeding, apparently. I was driving near Las Vegas at around 3 a.m. I had been following a few black SUVs along the highway for a good hour or so. They had Nevada plates that were single-digit numbers in order, 1, 2, 3. Suddenly they all pulled off the highway down a dirt path. There was no mile marker or cactus that would indicate a path there. It was just dirt. After pulling off the road they all turned their lights off. I didn't stick around. It was creepy. My dad told me and my brothers this story when we were growing up and it's always stuck with me, particularly on long drives when I'm feeling a bit sleepy. The first time I remember hearing it was after I asked him if angels were real. I was probably 7 or 8. He drove trucks decades ago, before I was born and before labor laws around limits and brakes were more standard. I'm assuming it's different now. He'd fairly regularly accept calls that would extend his shift to where he was driving 24 to 36 hours, without a break longer than a quick bathroom or fast food stop. My dad has a pretty mathematical brain. He's the type to make up logic puzzles out of something totally mundane just for fun. Whenever we were driving around town, he'd regularly ask me things like how long would it take us to get from home to the store if we were going 30 miles per hour but had to stop for 5 minutes in the middle because a family of kittens were crossing the road, etc. He'd come up with similar equations for himself while he was driving solo that involved things he was seeing like the odometer, mileage markers, the time, and then he could test his speed based on the equation, etc. One night after having already driven a particularly long day, he noticed his eyes getting droopier and the whole roll down the window and blast the music up thing didn't seem to be helping much. It was a rainy night on a pretty windy mountain road without a shoulder to pull over safely, so he started doing those logic games out loud to keep alert and awake. He was saying something to the effect of I just passed mile marker 146, so what time will it be when I reach 200 if I'm going 55 miles per hour? Then he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and felt his head do the nod-jerk thing, which woke him up with a gasp. He opened his eyes to see he was driving straight towards mile marker 158, which would have sent his whole truck tumbling down a random mountain ravine. He was able to correct the course safely back, but it was a matter of seconds between that reality and certain death. He insists to this day that he slept through 12 miles of windy mountain road going 60+ miles per hour, only to wake up right at the last moment between life and death. The story usually ends with him tearing up saying, "I don't know if there's angels, but I know there's something bigger going on in this universe than our human brains have been able to understand yet. If I wouldn't have woken up right when I did, you kids wouldn't be here today, and that's something that feels pretty close to spiritual." Obligatory not a trucker, but the black dog is a popular omen seen by many truckers while spending late nights out on the road. The dog appears late at night when the driver starts to drift off to sleep and often is a precursor or warning to a fatal crash. While there are many stories of truckers seeing the dog and snapping back to reality with a sudden rush of adrenaline, there are also a handful of stories where truckers swerve to avoid the dog, resulting in a crash. I had a late night on the road a few months ago after a concert and had to drive back across the state. About an hour and I could feel my eyes getting heavy, regardless of the coffee I was drinking. As I drove through an underpass, I was able to see a flash of black just out of the corner of my eye. I brushed it off as nothing until later the same thing happened on the left side of the road just within the view of my headlights. I had read stories about the black dog before and knew I should soon pull off the highway and wait for my caffeine really start working. Not a long-haul trucker, but thought this would fit here. Also on mobile, so sorry for format. My mom, sister and I were on our way to a baseball game of mine during my junior year of high school. This was in northern New York, so spring got a little chilly at times. The main road we took stretched about 35 miles and was nothing but cornfields and tree lines. We hit a stretch of the road that was super foggy for no reason, so my mom slowed down to a proper speed. We finally reached the end of the fog and we all looked to the left to see where we were. About 50 yards from the road was a man and woman in what appeared to be wedding clothing from at least 100 years ago, man wearing a big top hat and the woman wearing a very old-looking white dress, holding hands with their backs to us walking towards the wood line. We drove past and I just remember the silence in the car until my mom said, "What the hell was that?" Till this day, whenever we are together and one of us tells the story, we all get goosebumps. Not a trucker, but I ran onto something creepy on a road and I have a picture of it too. My friend and I were coming back from a concert one night and were taking a shortcut through this area that was being worked on, so there wasn't really anyone around because it was late and the streets were closed. As we're crossing this small bridge, I looked up and saw what appeared to be a zombie rat jumping at my face. Scared the hell out of me. Turns out that someone had taken a mummified rat or squirrel and used wire to position it midair on that bridge. Here is the picture I snapped of it on the flip phone I had. The combination of that and the abandoned atmosphere of the construction area was so creepy that we ran until we hit a busy street. Years ago in the late 90s, I was on my way from the house, Central Texas, heading to Laredo to pick up a load. It was early morning, around 4 or 5. I had just come off a string of days at home, so I know I wasn't tired. I am on one of those 2-lane winding roads in the absolute middle of nowhere, when I see something on the side of the road at the edge of my high beams. At first I just thought it was roadkill, as is usually the case. As I get closer, I see that it is roadkill and there's someone crouching over the deer carcass. I remember thinking either this guy's taking the antlers as a trophy, or he's sick. As I got closer still, I can now see that's this guy's eating the deer. He's pulling chunks of meat from the stomach and bringing them up to his face. At this point he stops mid-motion and looks up at me. Not at my truck, but at me. It stands up and that's when I see that it's huge, brown, and covered in hair. I remember thinking at this point, oh no, this thing is standing on the tiny shoulder looking at me. By this point, maybe 3 seconds have passed and I'm about at the point in the road he's standing at. I didn't even think of stopping, in fact I'm starting to lay on it and get the hell out of there. As I'm passing it, it's looking at me, again not at the truck, it's looking through the driver's side windshield at me. He obviously has the intelligence to know that there's a driver in here and knows where I'm sitting. As I start to pass him I can still see its head above the hood of an old needle-nose Pete. This thing is giant. I remember seeing what looked like human intelligence in its eyes. It scares the hell out of me. Was driving on this back road at maybe 2 to 3 a.m. after hanging out with friends. Nobody on the roads. Certainly nobody walking. It was incredibly foggy. The area here is a small protected wetland and visibility was maybe 30 to 40 feet at best. There is a 90-degree turn. As I'm turning, there is a man standing there, arms at his sides, wearing ragged clothes. Maybe a bit off the mark, but it still scared the hell out of me. I was headed west on I-76 here in Denver, just cruising along at about 7 oomph. Out of nowhere, I saw a massive, almost solid cloud of what looked to be dirt coming at me. I'd say it was at least 20 feet wide and 10 feet tall. I scanned ahead of me but couldn't see any vehicle it could have came from. With nowhere to go I slowed down and took the hit, hoping there wasn't anything big enough in there to come through the windshield or jack up my truck. It was pretty loud as I smashed through it. The instant it hit I knew it wasn't dirt though. I immediately hit the washers because I couldn't see a thing through all of the carnage. My windshield was painted with guts. Turns out it was bees, freaking huge bees that sounded like rocks when they hit. I can't even imagine seeing that swarm if I was walking. They would kill the crap out of anything in their path. A friend of my cousin was a long-haul trucker. He was making a delivery across the country and was in a hardly used dirt stretch of a rural route. Since the road wasn't exactly peachy he had to drive slowly. He sees another truck slowly approaching from the opposite direction, and he sees the truck is the same as his. Since this isn't fairly uncommon, he didn't think much of it, but as the other one grew closer he decided to honk in recognition of having the same kind of truck. The other one replies and all is good. That is, until they narrowly and very slowly had to pass one another. He turned to look at the driver and he saw himself. Not a reflection, not a similar person, but his exact same copy, same clothes, same hat, same red beard, staring at him. They passed each other and that was that. He told me he'd seen very weird things, but that was the moment he decided to stop being a trucker. I was in rural Maine looking for a lumber mill just before sunset. It took hours to get out there because Maine is riddled with these narrow windy roads that try and get as close as possible to every building in every village from US 1 to Canada. So I pull in just as the last guy is leaving. I ask him where to park and say I'll see him in the morning. I park my truck in this fairly large gravel parking lot with thick forest right on all sides. There are no visible artificial lights except for my truck and my flashlight. After I get parked I go and sit out on a lawn chair and just enjoy the warm night air and look at the absolutely beautiful night sky. It was a rare treat to enjoy basically no light pollution. As I'm looking at the stars, like a switch was flipped, what sound like 50 coyotes, 60 feet away, start howling like mad. It is at this point I nope right back into the truck and don't open the door until sunrise. The town of West Salem, Wisconsin has always kind of given me the shivers. It's like it's both empty and full of people at the same time. Nothing concrete, just feels like things aren't quite right in that town. I'm a stand-up comic. I often refer to my profession as being a trucker with jokes. Near the north end of mainland Michigan, I saw a car stopped on the side of the highway. We hadn't seen a car for a while. It was 2 a.m. I commented to my buddy, "Poor bastard." But as we passed the car, the lights came on and it got back on the road. Odd timing. And then, it was gaining on us. I told my friend to speed, he did. He sped more and the car kept closing in. We were doing 120 and this guy was catching up to us. We saw an exit with a hotel so we took it and drove right in front of the building, where it was well lit and we could see the front desk clerk. The car got off that exit too. It drove into the hotel parking lot. Then turned around, and got back on the highway. I'll never know what that guy wanted from us. I'm fine with that remaining a mystery. Not a trucker, but I've driven cross country a few times. Have 2 freaky things that have happened. First, middle of the night with a buddy and we pulled off to the side of the highway to take a piss and switch drivers. Nobody else around on the road. I walk to the side, pitch black, whip it out and start to pee. My buddy is just stretching his back or whatever. I heard something in the woods shake a tree. No other way to describe it, a tree about 30 feet away shook. Then I hear something big crashing through the woods coming straight for us in the car. My buddy and I don't even say anything. He dives in the driver's side and I jump through the passenger window, pants still down. He floors it out of there, legs and pants dangling outside. Never did see anything in the rearview mirror, but there was something out there coming at us. My buddy likes to say he heard me stop peeing when that tree shook. Second, I was solo somewhere in West Virginia, again middle of the night. I got off an exit, one of those long curvy ones. I saw lights before I got off and assumed it was exit stuff, or maybe even construction. Get to the exit and it's not construction, it's a ton of Army or National Guard guys. The exit was lit up brighter than daytime, so many lights set up pointing everywhere. The Army guys were completely decked out, gas masks on and assault rifles. They were sprinting around. One guy at the corner was frantically waving me through to get back on the highway. I gunned it out of there. Looked in the news later and didn't see anything, no idea what was going on that night. Thanks for listening to Radio TTS. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell for more videos. Click the right box for the Radio TTS playlist and let us know what the next video should be about.